Today we're going to talk about compositing in still life photography and how you can use it to drastically improve the quality of your photos. Compositing is the process of combining multiple images together inside Photoshop to create one final image. You'll probably be aware of it, or you've probably seen it in crazy otherworldly photos that are just impossible to create. There's certainly no location like it. They most likely would have been composites. Someone might have taken, for example, an image of a hiker, of a waterfall, of a cityscape and of a jungle, and then have created some crazy scene with a narrative of like a hiker stumbling across this city in the middle of the jungle. That's not the sort of compositing that I'm talking about for still life photography. What I'm actually talking about is something a lot more simple. Now I'll just demonstrate quickly with something I was photographing the other day. So I was photographing this gin bottle the other day and I needed to get every element of it perfect. So I needed the neck to be perfect, the glass to be shot perfectly, and the label, every element of this label from the queen on the front to the text to all of it to all look perfect. Now, if I was to do this without compositing, how many lights would I have needed? I would have needed at least 2 to get the neck looking good. Would those 2 have then happily have been positioned correctly to get the glass looking right? Maybe, maybe not. Would they also have been positioned perfectly to get the label looking right? Maybe, maybe not. Most likely not. Which would mean I probably would have needed another 2 or 3 lights for the glass, another 2 or 3 lights for the label. Now that means that just off the top of my head, I would have needed roughly 8 lights to photograph that one bottle. Imagine if you were photographing a watch, even more complicated, you would have potentially have needed even more lights. So then all of a sudden you need 10 lights to photograph one item. Now there are lots of problems that come in with that. Space is the one that immediately comes to mind. And then gear. Who really has 10 lights, 10 light stands, 10 additional stands for scrims and whatever else you might need in the shot? It just doesn't really happen. And how on earth you would space all of that around your product, I have no idea. Even if you had all C stands and an unlimited amount of space, it would be a nightmare. And on top of that, imagine photographing a watch. You have a very, very limited amount of space. If you have 10 lights, they're all going to interfere with each other and it's just going to be a wash. It's not going to work. So compositing allows you to photograph on each individual element. Just like with the bottle of gin there, I could focus on the neck, I could focus on the glass, and I could focus on the label without getting tied up in having tons and tons of equipment. Now I'm going to jump into Photoshop now and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about with an image I created a little while ago. One of the great things about this technique is that it's actually extremely simple to do once you're inside Photoshop. There are no complicated Photoshop techniques that you need to learn or do. You're most likely going to know most of this stuff already. Now, as you saw in the introduction, this is the actual final image I was creating using that bottle of Bombay Sapphire. Now, as you can see, it's a very, very complicated image. Doing this without compositing would not have been possible. For one thing, the splashes. Doing all 6 of these splashes in camera, I have no idea how anyone could have done that without compositing. It would have taken a heck of a lot of effort and there's no way the bottle would have been lit as nicely as this. Now, as you can see with this bottle, there's a few lights that have been used for the top, like I said in the intro, some for the glass and some for the label. It's a lot of lights and doing all of that in one image is very, very difficult. So that's where compositing comes in. That's why it's so amazing. And now let's move on to the quick demonstration. So this is the image we're going to be demonstrating this technique with. This is a photo I created a while ago and I used compositing to get each element of this watch looking perfect. So let's see how it's done. So to begin with, you need to get your files into Photoshop. So you go File, Scripts, and Load Files into Stack. Then you can click Browse or Add Open Files. Add Open Files, or just add them if you've already got them open in Photoshop up here. Whereas Browse, you can find them on your computer. Now I've done this already, so it's opening it exactly where my files are. If not, you just find it on your computer. So you select them and click OK. And then when I click OK here, it will load all of these images into a single document. What you can do is you can click this button here, but what I'm going to do, I'm not going to click that now, and I'm going to show you what it does. It's called Attempt to Automatically Align Source Images. Kind of self-explanatory, but I'm going to show you anyway. So I click OK, it loads all the images up into one document. You can see it's loading them as we speak. Nearly done. One more to go. There we go. So now they're all loaded into, oh no, there's another one. Oh, whatever. So now they're all loaded into one Photoshop document, and if I hide them all, you'll see here. So if I turn this on and off, you can see those two layers line up perfectly. Now, there's some really important things you need to do prior to bringing your images into Photoshop. So during the shoot, there's some very important things you need to do to make sure this will be a very easy process. I'll cover that at the end of this video. This segment is more just about Photoshop. So as you can see, these line up perfectly. They don't actually move anyway, so that's fine. As does this. This is a shot for the diamonds. You can see it's labeled there. That also barely moved. There looks to be a little bit of movement. It might just be my eyes tricking me because the light is quite different. And then we have this one here where, yeah, the watch moves a lot. That might have been me nudging it on set. It could be a number of things. And same with this, that moves quite a bit. So what we want to do first is we want to select all of the images and we want to go to Edit, Auto Align Layers. So this is exactly what that tick box would have done, but if you forgot to tick it or you imported your images in a different way, then this is how you would align them afterwards. You leave it on auto and you just click OK. And as you'll see, a little taskbar will come up. Photoshop analyzes all of these layers and lines them up based on, I don't know exactly how it works, but I'd imagine it's kind of analyzing it pixel by pixel and lining up edges and things. So now we'll see what's happened. Now we know the first few lined up very well, so now they are perfect. The diamond layer, yeah, that now doesn't look like it moves at all, so it might have been a little bit out. The crown, it does appear to move, but as you can see, the area down here is out of focus. And now the reason for that is that I didn't focus stack this image because I knew all I wanted was this crown there. You see, if I turn that off and the MK letters, the Michael Kors logo, is upside down. So I did a quick comp, which explains why the watch moved, because I had to actually touch it, which is generally a big no-no if you're doing this sort of thing. You don't really want to touch the product you're photographing because you don't want it to move. But if you actually need the part of your product to move, then you need to touch it. So that's why the image moved, and it was really helpful to be able to align it. And then lastly here we can see that, you can see the block underneath is actually moving, but the watch it moves a tiny bit, but the auto align has done a good enough job, and as I'm only using these bits, that's fine. So all we have to do now is masking. Now masking in Photoshop is a very, very common thing. Most of you are probably going to be familiar with it, but I'll give you a quick idea. So we have one layer underneath here and another layer here. This is for the face. Okay, so you see this is for this area here, it's for the face. Now if I click this button here, it creates a mask. Anything white on your mask is visible, anything black is invisible. So if I hit Control or Command I and I invert that mask, it becomes black and it goes from being visible to invisible. So see, if I hit Control Command I again and turn it white, that's visible, invisible, visible, invisible. Now if I paint on this layer, so I hit B for the brush tool, selects it there, and I just select a white brush, turn my opacity up to 100, and I just paint, what you'll see is you'll see areas start to come in. So you can see there, you'll see it on my mask here as well. I've just painted that area in. So if I just delete that, if I start painting on the face, it'll be really obvious. And I'll tell you what, I'll use a really hard brush and make this very, very obvious. So you see, I start to paint here, and you see it come in. You see how that changes? You see my layer mask looks like this. If you hit Alt or Option and click on your layer mask, you can see how it looks. So it's just selecting that area. Okay, so when you mask, there's tons of different ways to do it. You can use really complicated ways where you do it using the channels. You could use Apply Image, Focus Area, Select, select Color Range. There are tons of ways to do it, but essentially they're all the same. You're creating a mask like this where anything black is invisible, anything white is visible. And then there are lots of areas in between. So it wouldn't have to be completely white, for instance, if it was grey, like that. So I just changed my opacity to 50%. That would still be half visible, if that makes sense. Full white is completely visible, whereas something like that would be partially visible. Okay, so let me just delete that. Now there are tons of tutorials you can find online for this kind of thing, so I'm not covering it in too much detail now, but basically we're just doing really simple masking here. We're not using any of the complex techniques, which is why this is so great. It's really easy. So let's get these slightly in order. So yeah, we can have the straps first, yeah, and then the face, and then we'll do diamonds after that, and yeah, so they're already in a perfect order. That's nice. So I've created my mask, I've inverted it again, and what I'm going to do now is because this is a perfect kind of circle, because it's a machined item which has been made perfectly in inverted commas, I can just use a marquee tool. So I hit M for the marquee tool, and then shift, and you're able to cycle through it. So when I first selected it, you see over here, it was a square. I then hit shift and M, and I can cycle through the options within here. You can hold down on whatever tool you're on if it has a little arrow next to it, and you can select it, but it's much easier just to hit shift M. So I then select the elliptical marquee tool, and I drag it over here, and then we're going to transform this. So I right click and go transform selection, and then I'm just going to roughly place it over the edges of the face here. Now you probably noticed when I did this with the brush tool, it wasn't actually that bad. I used a really hard brush, which I probably wouldn't have done, but it looked okay. Now the reason for that is because we've aligned these images. We're not creating the type of complex composite that I spoke about in the beginning, where you're putting a man or a woman in the jungle next to a city, where you have to be really precise with your masks, or for the most part really precise. We're just masking the same product, but different photos of that same product in the same position. So our masks don't have to be perfect. They can be pretty rough and pretty quick. So that's why the brush tool worked, but I just want to demonstrate a few different ways you can do this. So we've selected that with our marquee tool. I now hit Alt Backspace, Alt or Option. Alt will select your foreground color, and Control or Command will select your background color. So in this case, my foreground color is white, and hitting Backspace let me fill the marquee with white. And there we go. You see it's created that on my mask, which means the black is invisible, the white is visible, the white being the face, and there we go. The face has been added in. As you can see, the image for this, there's a lot more contrast there. The face is cut out a lot more. Every detail in there is cut out, and that would have just been accomplished by moving the light a little bit. All right, so next one. Now we want to get the diamonds around here lit up a bit more. Now I remember this really clearly. The diamonds were kind of annoying to get lit up. I ended up using a couple different lights. One was kind of out of shot. If I create a new layer, I'll show you. There we go. To create a new layer, Alt, Control, Shift, and N, or Option, Command, Shift, N. You can create a new layer. And now all I did, I had two lights. Now you might have noticed I changed my opacity there. Useful little shortcut. The numbers at the top will change your opacity. So you see, as I hit different numbers, it changes the opacity. If you hit too quickly, so if I went 75, for instance, so if I wanted that, 75, it will do that. If you want to change your flow, just hold Shift and do the same thing. So all I had here, I had a light kind of up around this sort of area, pointing down with a relatively bare, I think it was just a reflector with some trace over it. And again, another one up here doing the same sort of thing, pointing straight into it to get these nice sort of specular lights to light up these diamonds. There may have been another one as well, although to be honest, I'm not sure. So to get the diamonds done, I'm going to create a new mask by hitting the button down there, Control or Command I to invert it, and now we want to select that. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to use the pen tool. Not everything that you do when you're doing this technique is going to be as simple as this watch. Now the pen tool right now is overkill. I don't really need to use the pen tool, but I'm doing it just to demonstrate for you. Now, as you'll notice, I've gone really far outside the line at the top here. That's because that area doesn't matter. As you would have seen in the final image, everything gets cut out anyway, so I'm not worrying about that edge. All I'm worrying about is the edge down here. So I'll create a few more points. Keep doing that. If you hold Shift when you create a point, it will drag the line out straight like that. If you let go of Shift, then you can kind of move it around. So I'm just holding Shift to create these nice lines. This isn't a tutorial about the pen tool, I'm afraid. So if you want that, again, there are tons online. Probably people who speak in a much more interesting way than me. All right, so there we go. So I've created a really quick circle just to select that area. If we right click and then go make selection, and I don't want to feather it because if I wanted to feather it, I can use a little bit up here. So I'll leave it at 0. And again, it's selected it. We do the same thing, Alt or Option and backspace, and then it's filled in that mask with white. You see? Now again, if you were doing a more complicated selection, the pen tool is really useful. You know, you could select out loads of little areas if your product was more complicated. I just wanted to show you a different technique. Now we don't want it to actually do the face. So what I'm going to do is hit Control and click on that layer mask. So it'll be Control or Command, and you can see it's now selected that. If I go back to this next layer mask and then hit Control Backspace, which as I've been talking about, then fills with black, and you can see our layer mask now looks like that. And our diamonds have been lit up. So that's 2 easy ways to create masks. You've got the pen tool and you can do it with the Marquee tool. Now we've got some other things to do. So we have the crown here. So now I can see it moves a little bit, but I don't think that's going to be a problem with what we're doing here. So again, we hit the mask button and then Control or Command I to invert it. And now I'm just going to paint. I'm going to use a soft brush. Leave it at 100% opacity and flow for the minute, and I'm just going to start painting here. Just get the MK logo in the correct orientation. Yeah, there we go. And then if I just toggle that on and off, I'm not even worried about this little area here, because in the final image again, that's removed. I just want to make sure that it looks right, which it does, so that's fine. If we wanted to, we could move it over or do whatever else we wanted, but we don't need to right now. So now we have the black lines at the edges. Now I added those black lines because while this metal, it does look nice right now, it looks matte. And if you want to make something look shiny, like these areas here, they look really shiny. This all looks shiny, that looks shiny. The reason this surface, so I'm talking about, let me create a new layer. I'm talking about this surface here, all of this. This does not look shiny, it looks matte. And the reason it does is because there are no black areas, there are no hard lines. That is how something will look shiny. It needs black areas, it needs hard lines, just like here. So what I did is I just got a couple pieces of black card, added them on, and I wasn't even sure if I was necessarily going to use it or not, but once I got it into Photoshop, I was certain. And then all we have to do again, we're just going to use the brush tool, and we're going to paint it on. Now I'm using a Wacom tablet. You don't have to be. It's a lot easier, but you don't have to. So you can use a brush tool. I think the more you get used to this sort of thing, the more you'll realize you want a Wacom tablet. It has pressure sensitivity, so if I push really lightly, you see it makes a really small little line. If I push hard, it makes a harder line, a larger line. So it's quite nice. It's more similar to actually painting or drawing, which is very nice inside Photoshop. So there we go. Those are those painted on. Very, very simple. And now, so what have we done? We've gone from that image, which looked good, but then we added the face to carve that out, and that is a massive improvement. We then added the diamonds, again, huge improvement over the original. We changed the crown, which would have been completely necessary, and we add the black lines, which make that surface look a lot more glossy. So if we go before and after, that's the before, and that is the after. I hope you can agree it looks a lot better. And the great thing about this is it's quick. It's really easy to do on set. You know, compositing here has allowed me to produce a much higher quality image than would have been otherwise possible. If I'd just gone with that, yeah, you could have made some adjustments in Photoshop. Certainly, you could have bumped up you know, made some big curve adjustment and made the diamonds shine a bit more, and another curve adjustment to bring out some contrast in the face. But it's not easy. It's much easier to do on set rather. And then the other benefits is how quick this was. You know, the process of actually moving lights around on set was very quick. It was, you know, move a few things around to change it for the face, move a few things around to change it for the straps. It doesn't take long, and then you're left with a much better image. And finally, it allowed me to focus on each area of the watch individually, so I could have my light set up for the straps and make sure they look perfect, have my light set up for the face and make sure that looked perfect, and have my light set up for all around here and make sure that looked perfect, which is a really great way of working to ensure that you're producing the highest quality image possible. So as you can see, compositing is really useful in still life. There are, however, a few things that you need to make note of while you're actually shooting. Firstly, make sure the camera and your product does not move. Ideally, you'd be using a studio stand, one of those big column-shaped stands for your camera to make sure it doesn't move at all, but you don't have to. I don't always. Just make sure that nothing moves as much as possible. If anything does, if your product gets nudged or your camera tripod gets nudged, take the time to move everything back into position. Trust me, it'll be a lot easier in Photoshop if you do that. The second point is to do with how drastically you can actually change your lights to photograph each element. If you make too drastic of a change, then they won't sit together correctly. It'll look a bit off. Now, it's hard to really give you a definite on that because it's really something that you'll have to tell product to product, and it's something that you'll know from experience. So the more you do this technique, the more you'll know how far you can push it as you're photographing each element. Now, the final tip is to do with having clients on set. As you do this more and more, you'll be able to visualize the final image, but most likely your clients won't be able to. So what I'd advise is create an image that is almost there and then start systematically doing your composite. Doing it that way, the client has something to reference. And then I'd also suggest creating rough composites as you're going throughout the day. This will really help the client and it will actually help you as well. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, chuck them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you next time. Thanks.